Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first video I've made that's a new one in a while, and I wouldn't ordinarily be doing this, but I'm not there on Friday, and so I'm hoping that you're watching this in lieu of me teaching on Friday. So you're going to take about 15 minutes, you're going to use this video as a way of making your way down the first page of the Unit 3 study guide. Now, the Unit 3 study guide is cleverly entitled, Fighting for Independence and Forging the New Nation. Whew, sounds like a page-turner. Okay, certainly is. 1754 is the start of the French and Indian War, which is a big watershed moment for us. And then 1800 is what we call the Jeffersonian Revolution, the moment where Jefferson takes the mantle of leadership from President Adams and begins running the country, and the Democratic Republican Party of Jefferson takes over from the Federalist Party. But more on that later. Okay, let's get to it. List factors that contributed to the outbreak of the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. Well, the war has been brewing for a while. So factor number one, long-time colonial rivalry. The French and the English have been jockeying for position and power around the globe, and America is the chief aim of both countries. America is the most lucrative of the colonial empires in the world. And so, although the English have a much larger population in America, 10 times as many people, and the French really are in the northern portion, and then northern portion I mean by that what we would today call Quebec, and then down the St. Lawrence Riverway and into the area of the Great Lakes. Those settlements of the Americans are starting to get over the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, and they are coming across French settlers who are pushing their way closer to the Appalachian Mountains as well. And so there are areas in the western parts of Pennsylvania, for instance, and what is today Ohio, where we start to see clashes between the French and the English. Reason number two, the Native Americans have really done a great job here of playing the French and the English against each other, but it's worn a little bit thin. Both the French and the English are tired of the flip-flopping on the alliances, they're tired of the bribery for gifts, and they expect the Native Americans to choose a side in this conflict, and the war is going to offer that opportunity. Reason number three, the colonists have a lot to fight for here. A lot of the colonies in America are absolutely bursting at the seams. That's particularly true of our friends in New England, who are hoping that the war will bring them the opportunity of expanding to the other side of the Appalachian Mountains and moving into what we call the Trans-Appalachian West. That's Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and the areas that are really kind of the upper Midwestern portion of the United States. That's what the colonists would like to see. Their thought, we've helped the English fight this war, we win the war, and when things are said and done, we'll be able to take some of that land. Now, consequences of the French and Indian War. As you know from AP experience, the wars are not really our big focus. If you're looking for some fun times on the war, go watch Last of the Mohicans with Daniel Day-Lewis, or listen to the soundtrack, which is hauntingly good. Fantastic stuff. Pandora it. You'll find it. Okay? Consequences of the French and Indian War. For the French, pack your bags. Au revoir. You are gone. Okay? The French lose the French and Indian War, partially because, as we said, they have 1/10 the number of settlers, but also because they unfortunately don't commit the sort of money that the English commit to trying to win this war. And so the English are going to be able to spend more money, have more people, and the French are out of here. They lose all of their possessions in Canada and the mainland of North America, and they're stripped down to a few possessions in the Caribbean. Number two, Great Britain. Jackpot. The victory in the French and Indian War grants the English access to all of the lands of the North American continent as far east, as far west as the Mississippi River. So in other words, if you start at the Mississippi River and you walk to the Atlantic Ocean, walking eastward, all of that belongs to the English. And now that opens up the possibility of taking advantage of that lucrative trade that the French had and expanding the English settlements even more than they are expanding at the moment. The Native Americans, the American colonists. American colonists come out of this with a little bit of a dinged-up record. As we'll talk about in a moment, American colonists thought that they were going to get the opportunity here to expand into this new land. That's not going to happen. Hate to ruin the ending. Also, a lot of American colonists came together for the first time and found a commonality. We've been looking for it, right? We've been looking for this sense of Americanness. We haven't found it yet. We didn't see it in the Great Dominion of New York debacle. We didn't see it in the Albany Plan of Union refusal. We've been looking for a moment where Americans say, we like each other. I'm from Massachusetts, and I have a friend who's a Virginian. I have a friend who is from North Carolina, and I am a proud Pennsylvanian. That's not something we said up until that point. Fighting in the war and, importantly, being treated like second-class citizens by British officers during the war gave American regulars, or colonial militiamen, the opportunity to begin to see each other as equals and have a common American feeling about things. Now, we're not ready for revolution yet. Don't start dumping tea in the harbor. But we're feeling a little bit of a slight. They didn't like all of our posts. No one retweeted our stuff. Not good. It's not good. Native Americans. If you're the Native Americans, this war was a decision moment, and most Native American tribes allied themselves with the French. That's why it's called the French and Indian War. It's the French and Indian War against England. And having allied with the French, they lost. Now, why would I choose the French if I'm a Native American? Let's look at that for a second. The French leave a much smaller footprint, unlike the English, who show up like a population steamroller and just keep going west. The French were very small in the amount of people that they sent to the Americas, and so as a Native American, I'm much more likely to choose the French side of it. When the French lose, the Native Americans begin to believe that they will be marched off of the land as quickly as the French were. One particular leader, Pontiac, leader of a Native American group in what's today Ohio and western Pennsylvania, decides to take matters into his own hands. And in Pontiac's rebellion of 1763, Pontiac and Native American warriors attack English forts and settlements along the western portion of their colonies. The point is, we are not going to let you take this land as quickly as you think we are, and you're going to have to do something about defending these people. Now, the English quickly fall into a moment here of what to do, and we'll see in 1763, the same year, that they lay down a rule, that's going to upset a lot of our colonial folk. Explain the complaints of the Paxton Boys in the years after the French and Indian War. The Paxton Boys are a group of Scotch-Irish settlers in Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania, you remember, is supposed to be an everybody-get-along great place, and unfortunately, it's just not. It's a place where there's a lot of anger over the lack of ability to go and conquer land from Native Americans, particularly among Scotch-Irish settlers in the western portion of the colony, these Paxton Boys as they were called. The Paxton Boys at the end of the French and Indian War felt as though now was the time to strike against the Native Americans, and they did. They struck against tribes of Native Americans in the West, violating colonial policy. Now, when the colonial militia began to march in order to get them, coming from Philadelphia, that little elite enclave of Quakerdom in the East, the Paxton Boys did not back down, and they marched straight for the militiamen, and it looked like there was going to be a civil war in Pennsylvania. Instead of having an actual civil war, Ben Franklin, man about the colony, jumped in between both sides and arbitrated a settlement between the groups. What's it a sign of? This victory in the war is a real moment for the colonists. They think that there are spoils to be had, and the spoils are mostly Western lands that they should be able to take. Colonial leadership, though, understands the cost of those wars and the costs of forts to defend settlers on the western portion of the frontier. They're not going to allow Westerners to simply bully their way into the further portions of the colony without any sort of prior approval. Assess the American and British views on their relationship after the French and Indian War. I want you to take the sheet of paper here, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to draw a line. Thusly. On one side of said line, we're going to talk about the English perspective, and on the other side of things, we're going to talk about the American perspective. Let's talk about the English perspective. We are in debt. How much debt? £135 million, Governor. That's a lot of debt, that is. £135 million. Is that right? Consider this, that in the average peacetime year, the budget of the English government prior to the French and Indian War was £8 million. £8 million and you're in debt £135 million? Holy MC Hammer, Batman, you really spent that one up. So now you're going to have to go and recoup that money if you can. The colonies, as I've spoken before, do not meet the operating costs that they are supposed to. They meet only roughly 1/4 of the costs. English people living in England pay 5 times more taxes than Americans do. Time to pay up, Americans. Okay? On top of that, there was a growing English feeling that colonial assemblies during that period of salutary neglect after old Robert Walpole had grown too strong and they needed their wings clipped. There is a need then to bring those American legislatures, the colonial legislatures, under the heel of the English. We're going to leave a lot of people in North America. The English leave a battalion of 10,000 redcoats in America, which gives the American colonials this feeling of, what's that for? Is that for war against somebody, or is that for suppression of us? Early on, that 10,000 person army, keep in mind, the English don't keep a standing army. It's not something they do. This is a very odd thing for them to do. They would say that they're defending the colonists against the French, who might come back, or the Native Americans who are rebellious, but if I'm an American colonist, I got my eye on you. You're sketchy. You're sketchy, England. I don't know about you. George III, who is the King of England at the time and took over in 1760, thinks it's about time the colonials learn their place. And after the French and Indian War, George begins a series of taxes, which we well know about, that are going to reshape the way the Americans see things and the way the British expect the Americans to pay their fair share. So George III is a big part of that decision-making process. Let's look at the American side of it for a moment. We did what we were asked. We were asked to go and leave our homes and our farms, often to the ravages of Native American attack and French attack, leaving the homes in the hands of our women and our children, and oftentimes coming home to find none of them there, and we did this in defense of English liberty. While we did it, we were mocked, beaten, refused pay, and roundly treated very poorly by English officers who saw colonials as being second-class citizens. This notion we had of us all being good English people on the same page, that gets ripped apart during the French and Indian War, and America feels as though we're not getting a fair shot. Okay? And there's this overall sense that fighting alongside other people, I'm in the trench, and it's not a trench, I know, but I'm next to someone from a different colony who I didn't think I had much in common with before, but now I do. And as a result of it, I begin to feel this growing sense of strong American feeling. I really have a kinship with other people. Let me get down the list here. I got to get in by 15 minutes, otherwise this won't work. But the trade with the colonies outgrew the trade with Britain. Weirdly enough, the colonies are now trading more amongst themselves than they are with the mother country. That's not how mercantilism is supposed to work, but there's so many people in America that it's functioning not as a colony, but like its own second mother country. Oh, that sounds like a sci-fi movie. Something like that. Okay? Colonial newspapers begin to represent what's called a Whig ideology. Whigs are the political party in England that challenge the center authority, challenge the king, and they begin to talk about a colonial bias. Colonial being anyone who thinks like an American. That's a pejorative for the matter. American. Oh, did you see how he was dressed? Oh, how American. Oh, la-ti-da. Okay? From 1760 to 1763, the English economy also began to slump a wee bit, leading to lower tax revenues and an overall feeling that the Americans needed to start helping the English repump the economy. So here we are. After this Great War, a moment that should have been an enormous watershed for both sides, and it's 1763. And in only 14 years, by then, 1777, we are definitely going to be shooting at each other. But in 1763, if you were to poll most Americans at that point, they would look you in the eye and say, yes, I am a loyal subject. I salute George III. I support him. I am an Englishman. And yet it is going to take about 2/3 of a generation or so to rip that idea to shreds. And Americans are going to be chomping at the bit to break out of the British Empire. I apologize for my absence. I'm not at school today. Got other things to take care of. I hope you are having a good day. I hope you have a safe weekend. Take care of yourselves and enjoy.